They say Christmas is the most wonderful time of the year. They say it's a time for family, for warmth, and for coming home. But as I sit here today, looking at the frost on a window that no longer belongs to me, I realize that for some, Christmas is just a season for shadows. It's a time when the people you love the most find the perfect wrapping paper to hide the sharpest knives. My name is Evelyn, and before you listen to my story, I want you to look at your own children. Look at them and ask yourself, do you really know what's hiding behind their smiles? Because I thought I knew my son, David. I thought I knew the boy I stayed up with during fevers, the boy whose tears I wiped away for 30 years. I didn't know that on the holiest night of the year, he would be the one to leave me out in the cold. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The pain, it makes the memories jumbled. Let's go back to last December. My house was glowing. I remember the way the oak floors used to shine under the Christmas tree lights. My husband, George, God rest his soul, he loved this house more than anything. He used to say, "Evie, this isn't just wood and brick. It's a fortress. No matter how cruel the world gets outside, inside these walls, you're safe." He spent 40 years making sure of that. Every nail he hammered, every coat of paint he applied, it was all for me. For us. George has been gone for 10 years now, but last Christmas I felt him everywhere. I felt him in the scent of the pine needles. I felt him in the creak of the rocking chair. I remember standing in the kitchen, my hands covered in flour, baking his favorite cinnamon rolls. I was humming an old carol, thinking about how lucky I was. My son David, his wife Sarah, and their 2 children had moved in with me a few months prior. "To take care of you, Mom," David had said. "The house is too big for you to manage alone." I was so happy. A lonely old woman's dream come true, right? To have the hallways filled with laughter again. I didn't mind the extra laundry. I didn't mind the noise. I was just grateful I wasn't going to die in a silent house. But looking back, the signs were there. Like the way Sarah would walk through the rooms, touching the antique furniture, not with love, but like she was appraising it at an auction. Or the way David would suddenly stop talking to her the moment I walked into the kitchen. I chose to see it as young people being busy. I chose to see love where there was only calculation. About a week before Christmas, the atmosphere shifted. It became suspiciously sweet. David started bringing me breakfast in bed, something he hadn't done since he was 7 years old. Sarah, who usually complained about my old-fashioned decorations, suddenly told me how classic and valuable the house felt. "Mom," David said to me one evening while we sat by the fire, "we have something special planned for you this year. A gift that's going to make sure you never have to worry about a single thing ever again. No more bills, no more taxes, no more stress. We're going to give you total peace of mind." I remember my heart swelling. I thought, "George, do you see this? Our son is taking care of me. You raised a good man." I reached out and squeezed David's hand. His skin felt cold, even by the fire, but I didn't think anything of it. I just thought it was the winter air. I spent the next few days in a blur of joy. I went into the attic and pulled out the old stockings, the ones George and I bought when we first got married. They were faded, the glitter was peeling, but they were precious. Sarah saw me hanging them and suggested, "Maybe we should get new ones, Mom? Something more modern? To go with the new start we're having." I laughed it off. "You can't replace memories, Sarah," I told her. Oh, if only I knew how much she wanted to replace me. The night before Christmas, the snow started falling heavily. A real white Christmas. I sat in George's old study, looking at his desk. I talked to him. I told him how happy I was. I told him the kids were finally settling in. I felt a strange chill in that room, though. A draft I couldn't find. Now I know it wasn't a draft. It was the feeling of my life's foundation cracking beneath me. David came in and kissed my forehead. "Go to sleep, Mom," he whispered. "Tomorrow is going to be a day you'll never forget." He was right. I will never forget it. But not for the reasons a mother should. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the muffled whispers coming from the guest room where David and Sarah stayed, I felt a tiny prick of unease. Why were they whispering so late? Why did Sarah's laugh sound so sharp, almost like a bird of prey? But I pushed it down. I told myself I was just an old woman getting cranky. I closed my eyes, dreaming of the surprise they had promised. I pictured a cruise, or maybe a new garden shed. I pictured more years of happiness in my home. I didn't know that in just a few hours, the son I gave life to would ask me to sign a piece of paper that would effectively end mine. You see, greed doesn't always come dressed as a villain. Sometimes, it comes dressed as a son holding a Christmas gift, smiling at you while he leads you to the edge of a cliff. Are you listening? Good. Because the morning of December 25th didn't start with carols. It started with a pen, and a lie so cold it would make the North Pole feel like midsummer. Christmas morning. I woke up before the sun was even fully over the horizon. You know how it is when you're old. Sleep becomes a light blanket that the smallest bit of excitement can toss aside. I lay there for a moment in the dark, looking at the shadow of the window frame on the wall. I felt like a little girl again. I whispered, "Merry Christmas, George," to the empty side of the bed, and for a second, just a second, I thought I smelled his old pipe tobacco. I got out of bed, my knees popping like dry twigs, and put on my thickest wool robe. I wanted the house to be perfect before David and Sarah woke up. I wanted them to walk downstairs and see that their old mother still had some magic left in her. I spent 2 hours in that kitchen. I made the blueberry pancakes David loved as a teenager. I set the table with the fine china, the ones with the little gold rims that we only used for the holiest of days. I was humming Silent Night, thinking about how blessed I was. Here I was 78 years old, and my family was under my roof. What more could a woman ask for? Around 8 a.m., I heard them, feet thumping on the stairs. Sarah was laughing, a high, nervous sound that I should have paid more attention to. David came in looking tired, with dark circles under his eyes. I thought he was just working too hard. I thought he was stressed about providing for his family. "Merry Christmas, Mom," he said, coming over to give me a kiss on the cheek. His face was unshaven, and his hand was shaking just a little bit when he reached for his coffee mug. "Merry Christmas, son," I said, beaming. "I've got your favorites on the griddle." Sarah walked in, looking like she'd stepped out of a magazine. She didn't offer to help with the dishes, but she was unusually chatty. "Oh, Evelyn, the tree looks adequate. But just wait until you see what we got you. David, should we bring it out now?" David looked at her, and for a fleeting moment, he looked like he wanted to run out the front door. He hesitated. "Maybe after breakfast, Sarah? Let her eat first." "Oh, don't be silly," Sarah chirped, her eyes bright and hard like glass beads. "She's been waiting all week. Let's do it now while the spirit is high." She hurried into the living room and came back dragging a large, beautifully wrapped box. It was covered in shiny silver paper with a massive red bow. It looked so heavy, so important. My heart started racing. I sat down at the kitchen table, wiping my hands on my apron. "Now, Mom," David said, sitting down across from me. He didn't look at the pancakes. He looked at his hands. "We talked about this. About making sure you're taken care of. You know the roof needs fixing, and the property taxes went up again this year, and your medical insurance. It's all getting so complicated." I nodded. "I know, David. It's been a bit of a struggle, but I manage." "Well, we don't want you to just manage anymore," Sarah interrupted, sliding the box toward me. "Open it." I pulled the ribbon. My fingers were clumsy with excitement. Inside the big box was another smaller box, and inside that one was a beautiful leather-bound folder. On top of the folder lay a gold-plated pen. I looked at them, confused. A pen? And a folder? David cleared his throat. "It's more than that, Mom. Inside are the peace of mind documents. We've set up a private family trust. It's a new legal way to protect your assets from the government and the hospital bills. If you sign these, the house and everything in it stays in the family forever. No one can ever touch it. It means you can live here until your very last breath without ever worrying about a single bill again. We'll take over the boring stuff, the taxes, the repairs, and you just get to be Grandma." Sarah leaned in, her voice like honey. "It's our gift to you, Evelyn. Security. We've already had the lawyer look it over. Everything is ready. We just need your signature to activate the trust." I looked at the gold pen. It caught the morning light and sparkled. I looked at my son. "Are you sure, David? This is a lot for you to take on." "Mom," he said, and his voice cracked. I thought it was emotion. I thought he was moved by his own kindness. "I just want you to be safe. Please. Just sign the last 3 pages where the red tabs are. For me? For your grandkids." I didn't read it. Why would I? This was the boy I'd taught to pray. This was the boy I'd walk to school every morning. You don't read the fine print when your own blood tells you they love you. I picked up that heavy gold pen. It felt cold. I remember the scratch of the nib against the crisp, white paper. Evelyn Margaret Miller. I signed the first page. Evelyn Margaret Miller. I signed the second. As I was signing the third page, the one that would officially hand over the title of my home, my sanctuary, my George's legacy, the sun came out from behind a cloud and hit the kitchen table. For a second, I couldn't see the lines. I hesitated. "Right there, Mom. Just one more," Sarah urged. Her hand was on my shoulder. It felt like a claw, pressing down, making sure I didn't get up. I finished the signature. The moment I laid the pen down, the atmosphere in that kitchen changed. It was like someone had sucked all the oxygen out of the room. Sarah snatched the folder away before the ink was even dry. She didn't say thank you. She didn't hug me. She just looked at David and nodded. David finally looked up at me. But he didn't look happy. He looked relieved, like a man who had just finished a very difficult, very dirty job. "Good," Sarah whispered, tucking the folder under her arm. "Now that the business is out of the way, let's have those pancakes, shall we?" She sat down and started eating, her eyes darting around the kitchen as if she was already deciding which walls to tear down. I sat there looking at my empty hands, feeling a strange, hollow coldness starting to grow in my chest. I didn't know it yet, but I had just signed away my right to scream. I had signed away my husband's hard work. I had signed away the very chair I was sitting in. I thought I was being taken care of. I didn't realize that in their minds, taking care of someone is exactly what you do before you put them away for good. And as the snow continued to fall outside, beautifully and silently, the trap was finally shut. And I was the one who had locked the door from the inside. The rest of that Christmas morning passed in a strange, thick fog. You'd think that after signing away your life's work, the sky would turn black or the ground would shake. But no. The sun kept shining on the snow, and the clock on the mantel kept ticking away, indifferent to the fact that its owner had just been erased from the deed of the house. I spent the afternoon in the kitchen. My back was aching, and my fingers felt stiff, but I didn't care. I wanted the Christmas dinner to be perfect. I thought, maybe if the dinner is wonderful, the heavy feeling in my chest will go away. Maybe I'm just being paranoid. I pulled the turkey out of the oven, 12 pounds of golden brown tradition. I had made the cranberry sauce from scratch, the way George liked it, with just a hint of orange zest. I set the table with the lace tablecloth my mother had brought over from the old country. It was delicate, beautiful, and held the history of 3 generations. But when Sarah walked into the dining room, she didn't see history. She saw clutter. "Evelyn," she said, her voice no longer having that sweet, honeyed edge it had this morning. Now it was sharp, precise. "Why did you bring out this old tablecloth? It's so yellowed. It makes the whole room look dated." I stopped, a bowl of mashed potatoes in my hands. "It was my mother's, Sarah. It's tradition." She sighed a loud, theatrical sound. "Well, traditions are fine, but we really need to start thinking about a more modern aesthetic for this place. Now that things are official." She didn't look at me when she said official. She looked at the walls, as if she were already imagining them painted a different color. My heart did a little flutter of fear. "Official? What do you mean, Sarah?" "The trust, Mom," David said, walking in. He looked like he'd been drinking. Not a lot, but enough to make his eyes glassier than usual. He wouldn't look at me either. "Sarah, just means we're in charge of the upkeep now. We want to make sure the value stays up." Dinner was served, but nobody seemed to have an appetite. I sat at the head of the table, the seat George used to occupy. It was my right. It had been my place for 50 years. I noticed Sarah whispering to David. Then, she looked at me and cleared her throat. "So, Evelyn, we were looking at the guest room upstairs. The one you're using. It has the best light in the house, doesn't it?" "It's the master bedroom, Sarah." I corrected her gently. George and I picked it because you can see the sunrise over the hills. Right, Sarah said, tapping her wine glass with a long, manicured nail. Well, we were thinking, since your knees are so bad, it doesn't make much sense for you to be climbing all those stairs every day. And David needs a proper home office. We thought it might be better if we moved your things down to the small sunroom off the kitchen. It's smaller, easier for you to manage. Less cleaning for us. The sunroom. It was barely more than a porch with glass windows. It was freezing in the winter and boiling in the summer. It was where I kept my sewing machine and my old plants. Move me? Out of my bedroom. My voice was trembling now. I looked at David. David, you can't be serious. Your father and I, we spent our whole lives in that room. David finally looked at me, but his eyes were cold. There was no little boy left in them. Mom, Sarah is right. It's about logistics. You're getting older. What if you fall? Down in the sunroom, we can keep an eye on you. It's for your safety. My safety, I whispered. Or your convenience? The silence that followed was deafening. Even the grandkids stopped eating and looked up, their eyes wide. Sarah's face hardened. The mask was completely gone now. Evelyn, let's be realistic, she said, leaning across the table. This house is a lot of work. We're the ones paying the bills now. We're the ones who signed the responsibility. That means we make the decisions. We want you to be comfortable, but we also have to live here. It's our house now, too. Our house now. The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked at the papers I had signed that morning, the peace of mind documents. A cold realization began to crawl up my spine. They hadn't protected me. They had replaced me. I looked at the turkey, the fine china, the lace tablecloth, and suddenly, it all looked like ashes. I had cooked a feast for my own executioners. I think I'd like to go to my room now, I said, my voice barely a ghost of itself. Fine, Sarah said, already reaching for the salad bowl. But don't start packing yet. We'll handle the move after the holidays. We wouldn't want to ruin the Christmas spirit, would we? I walked up those stairs, clutching the railing so hard my knuckles turned white. Every step felt like a mile. I went into my bedroom, and locked the door. I sat on the edge of the bed George and I had shared, and for the first time in 10 years, I didn't just miss him. I was terrified without him. I realized then that I didn't actually know what I had signed. I had trusted my son's word, but his word was as empty as the chair at the table. As I sat there in the dark, I heard a car pull into the driveway. It was late for visitors. I crept to the window and looked down. A man in a dark suit got out, carrying a briefcase. David met him at the door. They didn't go into the living room. They went into the study, George's study. I felt a sudden, urgent need to know what they were talking about. My heart was thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. I slipped out of my room and crept down the hallway, the shadows stretching out like long, black fingers. I reached the top of the stairs and strained my ears. How soon can we get her out? I heard Sarah's voice. It was sharp, cold, and final. The papers are filed, the man's voice replied. Technically, she's a guest in your home now. You can give her notice whenever you're ready. Most of these assisted living facilities require 30 days, but if she's unfit to care for herself, we can expedite it. Assisted living? David's voice sounded muffled, like he was crying. Or maybe he was just trying to convince himself. Is it a nice place? It's a place, David, Sarah snapped. It's where she belongs. We have a life to live. We can't be babysitters forever. Especially not if we want to sell this place by spring. Sell the house. I felt the world tilt. I had to grab the banister to keep from falling. They weren't just moving me to the sunroom. They were moving me out of my life. And they were selling the only piece of George the First had left. The peace of mind wasn't for me. It was for them. They wanted the peace of mind of knowing I was gone. I stood there in the dark, a 78-year-old woman with no home, no husband, and a son who had sold his soul for a piece of real estate. But as I looked at the gold-plated pen they had left on the hall table, a tiny, flickering spark of something other than fear began to grow. They thought I was a weak, old woman. They thought I was a problem to be solved. They forgot one thing. I was George Miller's wife, and I wasn't going into that assisted living without a fight. The morning after Christmas is always the loneliest day of the year. The excitement is gone, the wrapping paper is in the trash, and the cold reality of winter settles in. But for me, this wasn't just the end of a holiday. It was the beginning of a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I didn't sleep a wink that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that gold-plated pen. I saw my own signature, looping and elegant, dancing on those papers like a death warrant. I lay there listening to the house, my house. It was groaning, as if the very wood was mourning the fact that it had been traded away like a used car. I knew I had to do something. I wasn't just going to sit back and let them woo me away to some sterile room with white walls and a plastic tray for my dinner. Not while George's ghost was still walking these halls. I waited until I heard David's car pull out of the driveway. He was going back to work, or so he said. Probably going to talk to more real estate agents, I reckoned. Sarah was still in the house. I could hear her downstairs, humming a tune that sounded way too cheerful for a woman who was planning to dump her mother-in-law in a warehouse for the elderly. I needed to see those papers. I needed to know exactly what I had signed. I crept out of my room. My heart was thumping so hard I thought it would wake the neighbors. I made my way to George's study. The door was heavy oak, and it usually creaked, but I knew the secret spot on the floorboards to avoid the noise. I felt like a thief in my own home. Isn't that a tragedy? To feel like a criminal in the place where you raised your children. I pushed the door open. The room still smelled of George's old leather books and peppermint. I went straight to the desk. I started opening the drawers. My hands were shaking so much I could barely grip the handles. Come on, Evelyn. Where is it? I whispered to myself. I found a folder, but it wasn't the one from yesterday. It was a brochure. A glossy, colorful brochure for a place called SUNY Pines Senior Living. The cover showed a woman who looked a lot like me, sitting on a bench, smiling at a bird. But her eyes looked empty, like she had forgotten who she was. Underneath the brochure was a printout. It was an estimate, a cost analysis of what SUNY Pines would cost per month. And right next to it, the projected profit from the sale of my house. The numbers were staggering. They weren't just selling my home to pay for my care. They were selling it to fund a lifestyle they couldn't afford on their own. New cars, vacations, maybe a bigger house for themselves. They were trading my memories for a swimming pool and a leather interior. Looking for something, Evelyn? The voice was like a whip. I jumped, my heart nearly leaping out of my throat. Sarah was leaning against the doorframe, a cup of coffee in her hand. She wasn't smiling anymore. Her face was as cold as a marble headstone. I was just looking for my glasses, Sarah. I lied. My voice sounded thin and brittle, like dry leaves. She walked into the room, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor, a sound I used to find elegant, but now sounded like a countdown. She took the brochure from my hand and looked at it. Oh, you found the information for SUNY Pines. We weren't going to show you just yet. We wanted it to be a surprise for after New Year's. A surprise. I found my voice, and it was stronger than I expected. Sarah, you're talking about sending me away. This is my home. David promised me I'd be taken care of here. Sarah sighed, that fake, patronizing sigh she always used when she wanted to make me feel small. Evelyn, honey, you're confused. We've talked about this. You've been forgetful lately. Remember when you left the kettle on? Or when you forgot your neighbor's name? It's not safe for you here. The house is too big. You're starting to decline. David and we're just doing the hard thing because we love you. Don't you dare talk to me about love, I snapped. I know what you're doing. You tricked me into signing those papers. I want them back. I want to see a lawyer. Sarah stepped closer. She was taller than me, and in that moment she looked predatory. A lawyer? With what money, Evelyn? Your accounts are part of the trust now. And as for your confusion, well, David and I have been keeping a log. Every time you forget something, every time you seem a bit off, we've noted it. If you try to fight us, we'll just show the court that you're no longer of sound mind. Do you really want to go through that? The public embarrassment? Making David testify that his own mother is losing her marbles. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. They had thought of everything. They weren't just taking my house. They were taking my dignity. They were going to make the world believe I was crazy so they could keep the loot. You're a monster, I whispered. Sarah just smiled and took a sip of her coffee. No, Evelyn. I'm a woman who knows how to secure her family's future. Now why don't you go back to the kitchen? I've moved some of your things down to the sunroom already. It'll be easier for you. Less stairs to get confused on. I walked past her, my head down. I felt defeated. I felt small. I went to the kitchen and saw my favorite tea set, the one George gave me for our 25th anniversary, packed into a cardboard box. I sat down at the small table in the sunroom. It was cold in there. The heater didn't work right. I looked out the window at the snow. I felt like I was already in that assisted living place. I was a ghost haunting my own life. But then I looked down at my apron pocket. In the rush of Sarah catching me, she hadn't noticed that I'd swiped something else from the desk. Not the trust papers, but David's old cell phone. The one he'd replaced last month but kept in the drawer. I knew the password. He'd used the same one since he was a kid, his birthday. My fingers were shaking, but I managed to turn it on. It still had some battery. It still had access to the house Wi-Fi. I didn't have money. I didn't have a car. And according to them, I didn't have a mind. But I had a voice. And I had the one person Sarah and David had forgotten about. I scrolled through the contacts until I found the name, Arthur Vance. Arthur was George's best friend. He was a retired judge, a man who lived 2 towns over, and a man who had promised George on his deathbed that he'd always look out for me. I looked at the kitchen door. I could hear Sarah on the phone in the other room, probably talking to a decorator. I pressed call. The phone rang, and with every ring I prayed. Please, Arthur. Pick up. Please don't let the silence be the only thing I have left. Sound of a phone ringing, rhythmic and haunting. Finally, a click and a deep, gravelly voice answers. Hello. Hearing Arthur's voice was like finding a lighthouse in the middle of a hurricane. It was a voice from my past, a voice that smelled of old law books, expensive cigars, and the kind of integrity they don't make anymore. Arthur. I whispered, my voice cracking. Arthur, it's Evelyn. George's Evelyn. There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear him breathing, probably surprised to hear from a woman who hadn't called in 3 years. Evelyn? Good heavens, girl. It's Christmas. Why are you whispering? Is everything all right? No, Arthur, I said, my eyes darting toward the sunroom door. I could hear Sarah's footsteps in the hallway. Everything is wrong. They've taken the house. David and Sarah. They made me sign something. A trust, they called it. But now they're moving me to the sunroom. And they're talking about Sunny Pines. The silence on Arthur's end was different now. It wasn't surprise. It was the cold, hard silence of a judge listening to a crime. Sunny Pines? The assisted living facility? Evelyn, slow down. Tell me exactly what happened. I told him everything. I told him about the gold-plated pen. I told him about the peace of mind documents. I told him about the man in the suit who came over on Christmas night. As I spoke, the tears I'd been holding back finally started to fall, hot and bitter, down my cheeks. They're gaslighting you, Evie, Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave. It's an old trick. They make you feel like you're losing your mind so you won't fight back. But listen to me carefully. A trust signed under duress or through misrepresentation is not worth the paper it's printed on. But we need proof. We need to show that you didn't know what you were signing. How? I asked, wiping my eyes with the corner of my apron. They have the papers. I don't even have my own purse anymore. Sarah took it to keep it safe. You need to find those documents, Evelyn. Or better yet, you need to get David to admit on record that he lied to you. Do you think you can do that? Can you get him alone? Before I could answer, I heard the door handle rattle. My heart stopped. I have to go, I hissed. I'll try to call you back. I slid the phone under the seat cushion of the old wicker chair just as Sarah walked in. She was carrying a stack of thin, scratchy blankets. Who are you talking to, Evelyn? She asked, her eyes scanning the room like a hawk looking for a mouse. Nobody, Sarah, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I was just praying. Out loud. Sometimes it helps with the cold. She looked at me for a long beat, her lip curling in a way that made me realize she didn't believe a word of it. She threw the blankets onto the small cot she'd set up for me. Well, pray a little quieter. You're making the kids nervous. And why are you sitting in the dark? Are you trying to save electricity now that it's not your bill to pay? She walked over to the light switch and flipped it on. The harsh fluorescent bulb flickered to life, making the sunroom look even more miserable than it was. She stayed there for a moment, her eyes landing on the wicker chair. That chair is an eyesore, she remarked. We'll probably put it on the curb on trash day. It smells like old lady and dust. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. If I spoke, I'd scream. And if I screamed, she'd have all the proof she needed to call the paramedics and have me hauled away in a straitjacket. I just sat there, my hands folded in my lap, feeling the hard shape of the phone beneath me. Sarah left, but she didn't close the door all the way. She left it cracked, just enough so she could hear if I moved, but not enough to let the heat from the rest of the house in. I waited. I waited for hours. I listened to the sounds of my family living their lives. I heard them laughing at a movie. I heard the clink of wine glasses. I heard the life I had built being enjoyed by the people who had stolen it from me. Around 11 p.m., I heard Sarah go upstairs. A few minutes later, the back door creaked. That was David's routine. He'd go out for one last cigarette before bed. Standing on the porch, looking out at the yard George had landscaped with his own two hands. This was my chance. I grabbed the phone and slipped out of the sunroom. The kitchen was dark, lit only by the blue light of the digital clock on the stove. I moved like a shadow, my old bones miraculously silent for once. I stepped out onto the porch. The cold hit me like a physical punch, but I didn't flinch. David was standing by the railing, his back to me. He looked smaller than usual, his shoulders hunched. "It's cold out here, David," I said softly. He jumped, nearly dropping his cigarette. "Mom, what are you doing out here? You'll catch your death." "Would that be so bad?" I asked, stepping closer. "It would save you a lot of paperwork, wouldn't it?" David groaned, rubbing his face. "Don't start, Mom. Sarah says you're just having an episode. You're confused about the trust." "I'm not confused, David," I said, my voice as cold as the ice on the porch steps. "I remember everything. I remember you telling me it was a gift. I remember you saying I'd never have to worry about a bill again. You lied to me. You lied to your mother on Christmas Day." David turned around. In the moonlight, I could see the guilt eating at him. It was there, hidden in the lines around his mouth. "It's for the best, Mom. We're drowning in debt. Sarah's car, the kids' tuition. This house is worth a fortune. If we sell it, we can all have a fresh start." "A fresh start for you," I countered. "And a dead end for me. Did you even think about your father? About what he'd say if he saw you right now? Dad is dead," David suddenly shouted, his voice echoing in the quiet night. "And he left everything to you, leaving me with nothing but a mortgage and a dream that never happened. I've spent my whole life waiting for my turn, Mom. This is my turn." "By stealing from me? It's not stealing if you signed it," he hissed, stepping toward me. "And if you keep making trouble, Sarah is going to make sure you never see the grandkids again. Do you hear me? Just go to the sunroom, stay quiet, and in a month, you'll be in a nice place with people your own age. Don't make me be the bad guy, Mom." He turned and stomped back into the house, slamming the door behind him. I stood there in the snow, shivering. My heart was breaking all over again. My own son had just admitted he'd traded me for a fresh start. But then, I looked down at the phone in my hand. The screen was still glowing. I hadn't just been holding it. I had pressed the record button the moment I stepped onto the porch. I pressed stop. I played back the last few seconds. "It's not stealing if you signed it. This is my turn." His voice was clear. His intent was undeniable. I wasn't just an old woman in a sunroom anymore. I was a witness. And for the first time since Christmas morning, I felt a tiny, warm spark of hope. I had the proof. Now, I just had to survive long enough to get it to Arthur. I didn't sleep after the porch confrontation. How could I? I sat in that wicker chair, clutching the old cell phone like it was a holy relic. In that little piece of plastic and glass, I had David's voice. I had his confession. It was the only thing standing between me and a life behind the locked doors of Sunny Pines. But I knew Sarah. Sarah was like a cat. She didn't need to see you move to know where you were hiding. She could smell fear. And she could certainly smell a secret. As the sun began to peek through the frost-covered windows of the sunroom, I realized I had a problem. The phone's battery was at 12%. 12% of life left. I didn't have a charger. The charger was in the study, in the drawer where I'd found the phone. If the phone died, my proof died with it. I tucked the phone deep inside the lining of my old wool coat, which was draped over the cot. I had to get back into the study. I had to get that cord. I walked into the kitchen. The house was quiet, but it wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the kind of silence you feel right before a lightning strike. Sarah was standing at the counter, her back to me, stirring a cup of tea. She didn't turn around, but I saw her shoulders stiffen. "You're up early, Evelyn," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the fake cheer from yesterday. "I heard the back door open late last night. Were you wandering again? David said you seemed agitated." "I just needed some air, Sarah," I said, my voice steady. "The sunroom gets a bit stuffy." She turned around then. Her eyes were rimmed with red, like she'd been up all night planning. She looked at me, scanning my face, my hands, the pockets of my robe. "David is very upset. He's worried your condition is worsening. He thinks we should move up the date for the transition to the facility. Maybe by the end of the week." The end of the week? That was only 3 days away. "I'm not going anywhere, Sarah," I said, and for a moment the old Evelyn, the woman who had raised a son and stood by a man for 40 years, flashed in my eyes. Sarah smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was a baring of teeth. "We'll see about that. Now why don't you go sit in the living room? I'm going to tidy up your things in the sunroom. It's looking a bit cluttered." My heart plummeted. Tidy up. That was code for search. "No need," I said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "I'll do it myself." "I insist," Sarah said, stepping toward me. She reached out and gripped my arm. Her fingers were cold and tight. "You need to rest. Go. Seat. Now." She pushed past me toward the sunroom. I stood in the kitchen, paralyzed for a second. The phone was in my coat. If she picked up the coat to move it, she'd feel the weight. She'd find it. I had to distract her. "Wait!" I shouted. I grabbed a porcelain saucer from the table and let it slip through my fingers. Crash! The saucer shattered into 100 white shards across the floor. Sarah stopped and spun around, her face contorted with rage. "Evelyn, that was part of the good set." "I'm so sorry," I whimpered, putting on the act of a confused old woman. My hands, they just shook. "I'm so clumsy lately. Please don't be mad." Sarah growled under her breath and grabbed a broom from the pantry. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're a danger to yourself and this house. Stay there. Don't move or you'll cut your feet." While she was busy sweeping up the mess, cursing under her breath, I took the opportunity. I didn't go to the living room. I slipped into the study. The room felt different now, colder. I went to the desk, my heart hammering against my ribs. I pulled open the drawer. There it was, the tangled black cord. I grabbed it and shoved it into the waistband of my skirt, covering it with my sweater. I turned to leave, but as I did, I saw something on the desk that made me stop. It was a legal document, freshly printed. It wasn't the trust. It was a power of attorney form. It had David's name on it, and a space for a witness. But what caught my eye was the date. It was post-dated for tomorrow. They weren't just taking the house. They were preparing to take my right to speak, to vote, to decide what medicine I took. They were going to erase Evelyn Miller completely. "What are you doing in here?" I spun around. Sarah was standing in the doorway. She wasn't holding the broom anymore. She was holding my wool coat. My stomach turned to ice. She had gone into the sunroom anyway. "I was looking for a book," I stammered, my hand subconsciously pressing the hidden cord against my hip. Sarah walked into the room, tossing my coat onto the leather sofa. She looked at me with a terrifyingly calm expression. "I looked through your coat, Evelyn. I was going to hang it up for you." I held my breath. "Did she find it?" "And," I whispered. "And I found it interesting," she said, stepping closer, "that you're still carrying around George's old pocket watch. I thought you lost that years ago." She held up the silver watch. I realized in that moment that she had felt the weight in the pocket, but because the phone was wrapped in the inner lining and the watch was in the outer pocket, she had grabbed the first thing she felt. I felt a wave of relief so strong I almost fainted. It comforts me," I said, reaching for the watch. Sarah held it just out of my reach. "Well, you won't be needing it where you're going. They have clocks on the walls at Sunny Pines." She tucked the watch into her own pocket. "Now get out of this study. This is David's office now. And if I catch you in here again, I won't wait until the end of the week. I'll have you out by tonight." I hurried out of the room, my legs shaking. I made it back to the sunroom and locked the door, something I wasn't supposed to do. I pulled the phone out from the coat lining. 9%. I plugged the cord into the wall socket behind the wicker chair and watched as the little lightning bolt appeared on the screen. I was safe. For an hour. Maybe 2. But as I sat there, watching the snow fall, I realized that Sarah was getting closer. She was searching. She was watching. And she was losing her patience. I looked at the phone. I had the recording. I had the charger. But I was a prisoner in a glass room. And the woman who held the key was losing her mind faster than she claimed I was losing mine. I had to get this recording to Arthur. But the house was locked, the landline was cut, and Sarah was pacing the hallway like a wolf outside a sheepfold. I looked at the window. The latches were old, painted over a dozen times. If I could just get one open. If I could just get to the oak tree. Suddenly, I heard David's voice from the kitchen. He was shouting. "What do you mean she was in the study? Sarah, we agreed to wait." "She's on to us, David." Sarah screamed back. I saw it in her eyes. "We have to sign the power of attorney now. Tonight." While she's confused. "Just tell the notary she's resting and sign it for her." Forgery. They were going to forge my signature. I realized then that the time for waiting was over. If I didn't leave this house tonight, I would never leave it as a free woman. I looked at the oak tree outside the window. George had planted it for David. Tonight, I was going to use it to save myself from him. The house felt like a living thing that night, but it wasn't the warm, welcoming home I'd known for decades. It felt like a trap, its hallways like throat passages closing in on me. The shouting in the kitchen had died down, replaced by a much more terrifying sound. The low, rhythmic mumble of David and Sarah planning. They were in the study, probably practicing my signature, turning Evelyn Miller into a ghost before I was even in the ground. I looked at the phone. 40%. It wasn't full, but it was enough. I tucked it into my bra, right against my heart. It felt cold, but it was the only thing keeping me warm with hope. I knew I couldn't go out the front door. The floors in the hallway groaned if a mouse stepped on them, and Sarah's ears were tuned to my every move. No, the only way out was the sunroom window. This window. George had built this sunroom as an anniversary gift. He had painted the frames himself. Over the years, the layers of white paint had sealed the windows shut. I grabbed a small metal file from my sewing kit, the one I used to sharpen my needles. I began to scrape. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Every sound felt like a gunshot in the silent house. I stopped every few seconds, my heart hammering against my ribs, listening for footsteps. Nothing. Just the wind. My hands were arthritic, the joints swollen and aching from the cold. But I didn't feel the pain. I felt a surge of adrenaline I hadn't felt in 30 years. "Help me, George," I whispered. "Give me just a bit of your strength." Finally, I felt the seal break. The paint cracked. I pushed with everything I had. The window didn't budge. I leaned my shoulder against it, gritting my teeth, and pushed again. With a sickening crunch of old wood and ice, the window swung open. The cold hit me like a bucket of ice water. The snow was falling in thick, heavy flakes, blurring the world into a haze of white and gray. I looked down. It was a 4-foot drop to the frozen flower beds. To a 20-year-old, it was nothing. To me, it was a mountain. I climbed onto the ledge, my legs trembling so hard I thought I'd collapse. I looked at the old oak tree, its branches reaching out like skeletal arms. One thick branch hung just a few feet from the window. George had always said that tree was the soul of this property. I reached out and grabbed the branch. The bark was rough and wet, biting into my palms. I swung my legs out, my nightgown billowing in the wind, and let myself slide down the trunk. I hit the ground hard. A sharp pain shot through my ankle, making me gasp. I lay there in the snow for a moment, the cold seeping into my bones. I looked up at the sunroom window. It was still open, a dark rectangle in the glowing house. I had to move. If they saw that window open, it was over. I limped toward the edge of the property, staying in the shadows of the hedges. The snow was deep, up to my shins in some places. Every step was a battle. My breath came in ragged, white puffs. I looked back at the house I had loved, the house I had bled for, and it looked like a stranger's mansion. I reached the old iron gate at the back of the garden. It was locked. I had forgotten that David had put a new padlock on it last month for security. No, I sobbed, pulling at the cold metal. I was trapped. Behind me, the house lights flickered. I saw a shadow move in the kitchen. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness of the backyard. Evelyn. It was David's voice. He sounded annoyed, not worried. Mom, are you out here? Stop playing games. I dropped to the ground, huddling behind a large stone planter. The flashlight beam swept over the snow, missing me by inches. Sarah, the window is open, David yelled. I heard the back door slam open. I heard Sarah's boots crunching on the porch. I knew it. I knew she was up to something. Find her, David. She can't have gone far in this weather. She can barely walk. I looked at the gate. I couldn't climb it. I couldn't break it. But then I remembered. The loose bar. Years ago, when David was a teenager, he had bent one of the bars so he could slip out at night to meet his friends. George had never fixed it properly. I felt along the bottom of the gate, my fingers numb and blue. There. The third bar from the left. I pulled it with all my might. It groaned and shifted. I squeezed my thin frame through the gap, the metal tearing at my coat, scratching my skin. I was out. I was on the back lane. But I wasn't safe. The back lane was a mile long, and it led to the main road, which was deserted on the day after Christmas. I had no car. I had no shoes. Only my slippers, which were already soaked through and freezing. I started to walk. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away. I pulled the phone out. I had to call Arthur. I pressed the button. The screen stayed black. No. Please, I whispered. Not now. I pressed it again. A red battery icon flashed and then disappeared. The cold had killed the battery. The recording, my proof, my only hope, it was locked inside a dead piece of plastic. I stood in the middle of the dark, snowy lane, and for the first time, I felt the true weight of my age. I felt like a foolish old woman who had wandered out to die in the cold. I looked up at the sky, the stars hidden by the storm. Is this it, George? I asked the wind. Is this how our story ends? In a ditch while our sun sells our life away. Suddenly, I heard the roar of an engine. Headlights cut through the snow behind me. A car was coming down the lane. I didn't know if it was David coming to catch me, or a stranger who might help me. I had to make a choice. I could hide in the bushes and freeze, or I could stand my ground and find out who was behind that wheel. I stood in the middle of the road, my arms wrapped around myself, shivering so hard my teeth were chattering. The car slowed down. The tires hissed on the icy gravel. The driver's side window rolled down. I closed my eyes, praying for a miracle. Evelyn? Is that you? The voice wasn't David's. And it wasn't Sarah's. It was a voice I hadn't heard in years, but I would know it anywhere. It was the neighbor from 3 houses down, Mr. Henderson, the man George used to play chess with. Evelyn, what in God's name are you doing out here? You're freezing. Help me. I managed to say before my knees finally gave out. Please, don't take me back there. Just take me to Arthur Vance. Mr. Henderson didn't ask too many questions. He saw my blue lips, my torn nightgown, and the look of sheer terror in my eyes, and he knew. He wrapped me in a heavy wool blanket that smelled of his golden retriever, and turned the car heater up, so high it felt like a furnace. Don't you worry, Evelyn, he muttered, his hands gripping the steering wheel tight as he navigated the icy roads. I always told George that boy of yours had a streak of his mother-in-law in him. Too much ambition, not enough heart. We're going to Arthur's. Just hold on. As we drove away, I looked back one last time. In the distance, I saw the headlights of David's SUV pulling out of our driveway. They were searching for me. They knew I'd escaped, and they knew that an escaped witness was a liability they couldn't afford. It took 40 minutes to reach Arthur's house. It was a stately old brick home, sitting far back from the road, surrounded by tall pines. It looked like a fortress. Mr. Henderson helped me to the door, and before he could even ring the bell, the porch light clicked on. Arthur opened the door. He was wearing a silk robe, his white hair messy, but his eyes were as sharp as a prosecutor's. "Evelyn." He caught me as I stumbled forward. "Arthur, she was in the middle of the lane," Mr. Henderson explained. "She's freezing and she's terrified. Bring her in. Fast," Arthur commanded. The next hour was a blur of warm tea, dry clothes, and the crackle of a massive fireplace. Arthur's wife, Martha, tucked me into a sofa with enough quilts to weigh down a ship. Slowly, the feeling returned to my fingers. But as my body warmed, my heart only grew colder. "The phone is dead, Arthur," I whispered, pulling the cold piece of plastic from my pocket. "I recorded him. David. He admitted it. He admitted he lied to me to get the house. But it won't turn on." Arthur took the phone, his face grim. "Don't worry about the phone for a moment, Evie. We have chargers here. Martha, get the universal cable from the study." He looked at me, his gaze softening. "You did it. You got out. That's the hardest part." But we weren't safe yet. Not 20 minutes after the phone was plugged in, the sound of gravel crunching under tires echoed through the quiet house. A car had pulled into the driveway. A heavy car. My heart stopped. "It's them," I whispered, clutching the blanket to my chest. "They found me." "Stay here," Arthur said, his voice dropping into that tone he used when he was about to deliver a final verdict. He walked to the front door, standing tall. I followed him to the hallway, hiding in the shadows. Through the glass panels of the door, I saw David's SUV. He and Sarah jumped out. Sarah looked disheveled, her expensive coat unbuttoned, her face twisted in a mask of concerned daughter-in-law. David pounded on the door. "Arthur, I know she's in there. Open up." Arthur opened the door, but he didn't step aside. He filled the frame. "It's 1 o'clock in the morning, David. You're trespassing." "I'm looking for my mother," David shouted. He looked frantic, his eyes darting around. "She's had an episode. She's confused. She wandered out of the house in the middle of a storm. She's not well, Arthur. She needs her medication. Give her to us so we can take her home." "She is home, David," Arthur said calmly. "She's with family. Real family." Sarah stepped forward, her voice high and shrill. "Arthur, don't be ridiculous. We have the legal documents. We have the power of attorney. We are her legal guardians as of tomorrow. If you don't release her, we're calling the police for kidnapping." "Is that so?" Arthur leaned against the doorframe, a cold smile playing on his lips. "Well, Sarah, I've been a judge for 30 years. I know a thing or two about legal documents. And I also know that a power of attorney obtained through fraud and gaslighting is a felony. It carries a very long prison sentence. You can't prove a thing." Sarah spat. "It's our word against a senile old woman's." Inside the house, I heard a soft chirp. The phone. It had enough life to turn on. I hurried to the kitchen table where the phone lay. My fingers were shaking, but I found the file. I turned the volume to the maximum. I walked to the front door, standing right behind Arthur. David and Sarah saw me. For a second, David looked relieved, but Sarah's eyes turned into daggers. "Mom, come on," David said, his voice shaking. "Let's go home. Everything will be fine. We'll forget this ever happened." "I'll never forget it, David," I said. My voice was no longer thin. It was strong. It was the voice of the woman who had taught him how to be a man. A lesson he had clearly forgotten. I hit play. The night air was filled with David's own voice, loud and clear. "It's not stealing if you signed it. This is my turn." David's face went white. He looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Sarah stepped back, her mouth hanging open. The recording kept playing. My voice asking about his father, his shouting, his admission that he wanted the money for a fresh start. That's not what I meant," David stammered, his eyes filling with tears. "Mom, I was just frustrated." You were greedy, I said, the pain finally turning into a cold, hard anger. You were willing to throw your mother into a cage for a bigger car and a better zip code. On Christmas, David, on the day we celebrate love and birth, you chose to kill your mother's spirit. Arthur stepped forward, his eyes boring into David. Now here is what's going to happen. You and Sarah are going to get in that car and leave. Tomorrow morning, my associates will be at the house. You will sign a full reversal of that trust. You will vacate the property by the end of the week. If you don't, this recording goes to the district attorney. And I promise you, Sarah, the senior living facilities you've been looking at are a lot nicer than the prison cells I'll put you in. Sarah looked like she wanted to scream, but David just looked broken. He looked at me, a sob escaping his throat. Mom, please. Go, David, I said, and the finality in my voice surprised even me. Go and find that fresh start you wanted so badly. But you'll be doing it without my house. And you'll be doing it without me. They turned around and walked back to the car. I watched the taillights disappear into the snowy night. I was safe. The house was mine again. But as I turned back into the warmth of Arthur's home, I realized that while I had saved my roof, I had lost my son. I sat back down by the fire, the recording still playing in my head. The victory felt like ashes in my mouth. What now, Evie? Arthur asked softly, sitting across from me. I looked at the flames. Now I have to figure out how to live in a house that's full of ghosts, and how to forgive a son who is still alive but dead to me. 2 days later, the snow had stopped, leaving the world wrapped in a crisp, white shroud. Arthur drove me back to the house. The police had already been there, following up on the report Arthur had filed. David and Sarah were gone. Arthur's legal team had moved with the speed of a winter gale, making sure the reversal papers were signed before David could even pack his second suitcase. As I stepped onto the porch, I saw the oak tree. Its branches were heavy with snow, bowing low as if it were tired from watching the drama of the last few days. I walked into the foyer, and the first thing I felt wasn't relief. It was a cold, biting emptiness. The house was a mess. In their hurry to leave, or perhaps out of spite, Sarah had left things scattered everywhere. A half-eaten plate of Christmas cookies sat rotting on the counter. The Peace of Mind folder lay torn in the hallway. But the worst part was the silence. It wasn't the peaceful silence of a home at rest. It was the silence of a grave. Arthur walked in behind me, carrying my small bag. Are you sure you want to stay here alone tonight, Evie? Martha and I have a guest room waiting. I ran my hand along the banister. I have to, Arthur. If I don't face these walls now, I'll be afraid of them forever. This house and we have some talking to do. He nodded, squeezed my hand, and left. I heard his car pull away, and then I was truly alone. I walked into the kitchen. My eyes fell on the sunroom door. It was still cracked open, just as I'd left it when I crawled out the window. I walked inside and saw the small, pathetic cot Sarah had set up for me. The thin, scratchy blankets were piled on the floor. I looked at the window I had escaped through. It was still open, letting in the freezing air. I closed it. I locked it. And then I sat down on that cot and cried. I didn't cry for the house. I didn't cry for the money or the papers. I cried for the little boy who used to hide under the dining table to see Santa. I cried for the David who used to bring me dandelions from the yard. How does a mother mourn a son who is still breathing? How do you reconcile the man who tried to destroy you with the baby you once held in your arms? I spent the afternoon reclaiming my space. I moved my things back into the master bedroom. I dragged Sarah's modern decorations out to the curb. I polished the dining table until it shone like a mirror, erasing the fingerprints of the people who had tried to steal it. As I was cleaning, I found a small note tucked under the kitchen phone. It was David's handwriting. It wasn't an apology. It was just a list of phone numbers, real estate agents, movers, and the number for Sunny Pines. Even at the very end, he wasn't thinking about me. He was thinking about the transaction. Around 4 p.m., there was a knock at the door. My heart skipped. For a second, I hoped it was David, coming to fall at my feet and beg for forgiveness. I hoped he would tell me it was all a bad dream, that Sarah had drugged him, that he was my son again. I opened the door. It wasn't David. It was a young man in a delivery uniform. He was holding a large, colorful bouquet of lilies and a small gift-wrapped box. "Evelyn Miller?" he asked. "Yes," I whispered. "These were ordered a week ago. For the day after Christmas. The card says to the woman who built it all." I took the flowers and the box. My hands were shaking. I sat at the kitchen table and opened the box. Inside was a beautiful, silver-framed photograph. It was a picture of me, George, and David when he was just 10 years old. We were standing right in front of this house, laughing. The card was signed, "With all my love, David." He had ordered this gift before the Christmas morning betrayal. He had planned to give me this sentimental photo while he was simultaneously planning to take the house from under my feet. It was the ultimate cruelty, a gift designed to soften my heart, so I wouldn't suspect the hand that was reaching for my throat. I looked at the photo. The David in the picture had such honest eyes. The David of today was a stranger. I didn't put the photo on the mantle. I didn't put the lilies in a vase. I walked to the fireplace, the one where David and I had sat just days ago while he told me he wanted me to have peace of mind. I threw the card into the embers. I watched the edges curl and turn black. I watched the words, "With all my love," disappear into smoke. Later that evening, the phone rang. I didn't answer it. The machine picked up. "Mom." It was David. His voice sounded hollow, distant. "We're at a motel. Sarah is. She's talking about a divorce. She says I ruined everything because I couldn't handle you. Mom, I have nothing left. Please, can I just come over? Just to talk." I listened to his voice. I waited to feel that old maternal pull, that instinct to protect my child no matter what he'd done. But all I felt was a cold, hard stone where my heart used to be. "Mom, are you there? Please. I'm your son." The machine clicked off. Silence returned. I looked at the house. My house. It was mine again, but the price had been the only family I had left. I realized then that David was right about one thing. This was a fresh start. But it wasn't the one he wanted. I walked to the front window and looked at the oak tree. The sun was setting, casting long, blue shadows across the snow. I realized that like that tree, I had deep roots. I could survive the winter. I could survive the storm. But as I looked at the empty rooms, I knew that the hardest part wasn't the fight to keep the house. It was going to be the fight to keep my soul from turning into ice. One more part of this story remains. The part where the snow finally melts, and we see what's left underneath. New Year's Eve came and went like a ghost. For the first time in my life, I didn't make a resolution. What was the point of a resolution when your world had already been dismantled and put back together in a different shape? I spent those days in a quiet rhythm, cleaning, praying, and sitting by the window. The calls from David didn't stop at first. He called from the motel, then from a small apartment he'd scrambled to rent. Sarah had left him, just as she'd promised. She wasn't a woman who stayed for the for worse part of the vows. She was only there for the for better. And when the house was gone, she was gone too. In his messages, David sounded like a broken man. He talked about his regrets, about the pressure Sarah had put on him, about how he'd lost his way. He begged for a second chance. He wanted to come home. I sat at the kitchen table one morning, looking at the spot where I had signed those papers with that gold-plated pen. I realized that if I let him come back now, I wouldn't be his mother. I'd be his enabler. If I gave him the house again, I'd be teaching him that betrayal has no consequences. And George didn't raise a man like that. I picked up the phone, not to call David, but to call Arthur. "Arthur," I said, my voice as steady as the oak tree outside. "I've made a decision. I want you to help me draft a new will. A final one." A week later, I invited David over. Just him. No Sarah. No lawyers. Just a mother and her son in the house where he'd taken his first steps. When he walked through the door, I almost didn't recognize him. He looked old. Gray had crept into his hair, and his eyes were sunken. He reached out to hug me, but I stepped back. Not out of hate, but out of a need for space. My heart was still a bruised thing. And bruises don't heal if you keep touching them. "Mom," he whispered, looking around the living room. "It looks just like it used to." "No, David," I said, leading him to the dining table. "It looks like a house. But the home is gone. You took the home when you took that pen. I placed a single envelope on the table. What's this? He asked, his voice trembling with a flicker of hope. Are you letting me come back? Open it, I said. David opened the envelope. Inside was a copy of my new will, and a set of legal instructions. He read them, his eyes widening with every line. I don't understand, he said. You're donating the house? Not now, I explained. But when I pass, this house will not go to you, David. It will be turned into George's Haven, a shelter for elderly people who have been abandoned or mistreated by their families. People who, unlike me, don't have an Arthur to save them. People who have been left in the cold by the children they gave everything to. David slumped into the chair, the paper fluttering to the floor. I'm your only son. You're cutting me out. I'm not cutting you out, David, I said, sitting across from him. I've left you enough for a modest life. I've left you the small savings account your father set up for your education. But this house? This sanctuary? You proved you didn't value it. You saw it as a paycheck, not a legacy. And I won't let George's hard work be sold for a fresh start ever again. He started to cry real, heavy sobs. I'm sorry, Mom. I was so stupid. I was so weak. I know you are sorry, I said, and for the first time, I reached out and touched his hand. His skin was warm now, but my heart didn't flutter. But sorry doesn't fix a broken trust. It only acknowledges the pieces. You need to go now, David. You need to learn how to be a man on your own, without my roof over your head. Will I ever see you again? He asked, standing at the door. I looked at him, my boy, my only child. Maybe. One day. When I can look at you and not see that gold pen in your hand. But for now, I need to learn how to be Evelyn again. Not Mom, the bank. Not Grandma, the babysitter. Just Evelyn. I watched him walk down the driveway. He didn't look back. As his car disappeared, I felt a strange, light sensation in my chest. The weight was finally gone. I walked out to the backyard. The sun was warm on my face, the first real sign of spring. The snow was melting, turning into water that fed the roots of the oak tree. I looked up at the branches. I could almost see George standing there, his hands in his pockets, nodding at me with that quiet, proud smile of his. You did good, Evie. I could almost hear him say. You kept the fortress. I realized then that Christmas isn't about the gifts, and it isn't even just about family. It's about the truth. Sometimes the truth is beautiful, and sometimes it's as cold as a winter storm. But the truth is the only thing that can set you free. I'm an old woman now, living in a big house with a lot of echoes. But the echoes don't scare me anymore. They remind me that I'm still here. I'm still standing. And as long as these walls are mine, I will never be silent again. To anyone listening to my story, hold your loved ones close. But keep your eyes open. Because the people who know your heart the best are the only ones who know exactly where to strike to break it. Be kind to your elders. Not because they are weak, but because they have survived storms you haven't even dreamed of yet.